Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, November 6th, 2017. We have the full contingent of Budget and Finance Committee members here with us, and we're ready to begin today's agenda. Members, I would have proposed items 1 through 3 for consent approval, but we do have cards on those matters, so we're going to hold all those matters, but for the sake of staff who may be here on those matters, I will be recommending them for consent approval. And I don't know, members, any questions or concerns about those matters? 1 through 3? On 2? Okay. Looks like the only questions we'll have is on item number 2, so if staff on 1 and 3 don't want to stay, that's fine with me. So that will bring up then item, we're going to go out of order and take up, yes, Mr. Williams. That's quite all right. We're going to go out of order and take up item number 5 first. And let's see. So we have a few cards on that. We'll start with Trinity Tran. Mr. Spindler, keep quiet. Do not disrupt this meeting. I don't want to hear your sounds. If I hear from you and you distract from this meeting, you'll be asked to leave because you're disrupting the meeting. So, 1 moment, please, Ms. Tran. We're at 5? Okay. Okay. So, Ms. Tran will be followed by Georgette Sharp, followed by Patrick Smith. Go right ahead.
Thank you to the Office of Finance and the Budget and Finance Committee for your continued leadership in creating a strong RFP for banking service. We're encouraged by the sections regarding socially responsible banking, including stronger efforts to enforce the Responsible Banking Ordinance, prohibit illegal banking practice, protect consumers from unethical behavior, and disqualify banks with inadequate CRA ratings. While the draft RFP has been significantly strengthened, there are some key issues that remain to be addressed. This includes predatory sales goal practices, socially and environmentally destructive investments and financing, and the violation of the rights of Indigenous people. We ask Council members to address these critical issues through revisions to the RFP or the RBO. Divest LA also urges the City to enforce at least a satisfactory, if not outstanding, CRA rating in the City's Responsible Banking RBO ordinance for banks at both the federal and state level, which directly addresses accountability with unethical financial institutions and their investment banking services with the City. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Georgette Sharp, followed by Patrick Smith.
Okay. My name is Georgette Sharp, and I am a member of ACE. Communities of color have been used and abused by predatory sales goals quotas. You powerful legislators have the might and know-how to stop predators from preying on our communities. Yet white and affluent communities are not equally targeted. Why? Sales goals quotas have depleted our communities of wealth and power, leaving nothing to pass on to our children, yet white and affluent communities can. I feel like an emancipated slave without a nickel to my name, with mouths to feed because my former master will not pay for labor that was once free. When 2016, Wells Fargo grossed high double-digit billions in revenue, and no one saw the red flag that their profits outpaced GDP. You've got the contractual power and authority to legislate what is fair and just by striking down predatory sales goals. Please stop the ripoff. All we want is justice and not just us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next, folks, I'm going to ask that we not applaud every speaker because that's going to just extend the discussion. Okay, so let's if we can just, we know where you're at. So, all right. Our next speaker is Patrick Smith, followed by Javier Sarmiento, followed by Beverly Roberts. Mr. Smith?
I'm Javier.
Is Mr. Smith here? Patrick Smith? Okay, I'll hold his card until So we'll go with Mr. Sarmiento, followed by Ms. Roberts, followed by Oriño Opinaldo.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Javier Sarmiento y vivo en San Fernando, Distrito
Sorry,
6.
committee, we don't have translation, so can you, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon. My name is Javier Sarmiento.
Vivo en San Fernando, Distrito 6, Panorama City.
I live in the San Fernando Valley in District 6 in Panorama City.
Y estoy aquí porque me estoy oponiendo a la enmienda o ordenanza para bancos responsables y también a la petición para propuesta para el contrato de servicios bancarios.
I'm here to oppose the amendments, the proposed amendments for the Responsible Banking Ordinance and the proposed Banking Service RFP.
Yo fui una víctima de este tipo de venta hace unos años que Wells Fargo tenía y seguía llamándome, vendiéndome tarjetas de crédito.
I was a victim a few years ago of predatory sales goals. Wells Fargo was constantly bugging me and calling me to get me to open up a credit card.
No quería esto por un momento, lo hice por problemas económicos, pero no estoy de acuerdo porque siempre ellos ponen muchos cargos y se aprovechan de la gente minoritaria y gente trabajadora.
I really didn't want to do this, but one day I felt forced to open a credit card because of I was in a tight economic situation. But I feel like this is not fair because they tack on lots of fees, and they particularly target communities like mine, immigrant communities and working class communities.
Por eso yo exijo que este comité no apruebe un contrato que no descalifique a los bancos que están obligando a sus empleados a vender muchas cuentas y préstamos que no necesitamos.
And that's why I'm calling on this committee to not approve any contract that does not disqualify banks that are forcing their employees to sell us products that we don't need.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Beverly Roberts, followed by Oriño Opinaldo, followed by Maria Loya. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Beverly Roberts, and I'm with the ACE organization, and also Build Better Banks. I'm a homeowner, and I live in South LA. I'm here to oppose the amendment to the Responsible Banking Ordinance and the General Banking Service, RFP, because they don't contain language that would disqualify banks that use predatory sales goals from receiving millions of dollars in city banking contracts. I was a victim of predatory lending because someone at the bank who gave me a loan on my house was being required to push high-cost loans on my community. These loans aren't being made in wealthy areas, but the banks are still going after elderly homeowners like myself in places like South LA, East LA, and the East San Fernando Valley. That's why we need the city to stop giving our money to the banks that force their employees to sell us stuff we don't need. So,
Ms. Roberts, I got to ask you to wrap up.
Okay.
But I'm going to call you again on the next matter. So,
will you? Because I want to finish. I only got one little paragraph.
all right. Go. You know what?
Can I finish it?
Could you hold the thought until we do the next matter? Because I'm going to bring you back up for the next matter
Okay.
on item number 4 as well. So, thank you. All right. Our next speaker is Oriño Opinaldo, followed by Maria Loya, followed by Michelle Milner. Good afternoon, sir.
I, Oriño Opinaldo, a member of ACE, Better Banks, Divest LA, and Fill the Burn Democratic Party. Each organization asks LA elected officials to incorporate new responsible banking standards and protection against predatory sale goals. The product that bank sales are tied to debt. I was one who experienced that from Wells Fargo, who put 3 insurances on my home loan. For 18 months, I called and called with no response. Never behind in my loan or taxes, a stranger approached who told me he could handle those loans. He did, but he with Wells Fargo set up a senior citizen to lose all home equity on a property where I lived for 65 years. The bank sales goals used to pressure bank workers caused pain and loss of jobs. That happened to my granddaughter, who studied hard in finances. She got her sister and aunt to join Wells Fargo, but she would not go after the goal that the bank demanded to misuse customers. So Wells Fargo set her up to be fired.
Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
Our next speaker is Maria Loya, followed by Michelle Milner, followed by, Aparna. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Maria Loya, and I'm with Committee for Better Banks. And first, I want to acknowledge the work that the Department of Finance has done in preparing the draft RFP. And although I think it's a good start, it falls short. And it falls short in several areas. One is in addressing the root cause of the 3.5 million unauthorized bank accounts and credit cards, and that's sales goals. We feel that the request for proposal bidding process should also incorporate the addressing the issues of predatory sales goals by weighing the bids of banks that don't use predatory sales goals heavier than the banks that do use predatory sales goals. We also feel that social responsibility scoring should be on par with the business and technical capability. We also feel that adverse environmental investments should also be addressed.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Michelle Milner, followed by Aparna Bakil? Buckley, I'm sorry. And then Patrick Smith. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We're making progress, and thank you for all of the issues that have been addressed so far in the RFP and the RBO. We've been working together for several months now, and it's nice that we're being heard. There are still a couple more points that I think that we can strengthen, and I think it would still be in the spirit of the RFP. It would still allow the city to have a banker and people and banks that will be able to bid on the process. So I really like that we're weighing, different aspects. I think it's important that we're weighing socially responsible investments as well as the environmentally responsible investments, but at the same time, we really have to look at what are the investments that impact the environment negatively, and also socially irresponsible investments. So we have submitted a few times, and I'm happy to submit again, a couple of different criteria or indices that could be used to determine what would that be. What does socially irresponsible look like? What does socially responsible look like?
Thank you. And Ms. Buckley?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to read part of Councilmember Nuri Martinez's letter to the Budget and Finance Committee. She recognizes that the current contracts for the City General Banking Services are set to expire on June 30th, 2018, and believes that the changes recommended above can be completed in a timely manner and allow for the RFP process to be completed by the next fiscal year. The Office of Finance should be instructed to withhold issuances posting of the draft RFP dated November 2nd, 2017, promptly transmit a new draft RFP which includes a recalibrated scoring structure which places equal value on social responsibility as it does on organizational, business, or technical capacity, report on the feasibility of social responsibility organizations being able to serve as references as part of the 10 points to be awarded, and report on the feasibility of social responsibility organizations being able to serve on any evaluation or interview panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. The Los Angeles City Council should not endorse predatory sales goals practices by awarding city banking contracts to banking institutions that improperly profit from these type of services at the expense of the community, especially when dishonestly targeting the elderly, the minority, and poor by lying and coercing them to accept offers and products and services that do not benefit them, but the banks instead. Another victim of predatory sales goals is the bank employees who are forced, harassed, and by upper management to commit these bank frauds on customers, and when the crimes are exposed, the blame is shifted by upper management to the bank employees who follow the instruction in order to put food on their table.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, our last two speakers are Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman, and so you will, because you filled out multiple cards, you'll still have 2 minutes for all of your matters. You can use up to 1 minute on this matter if you would like now. So we're on item number 5, Mr. Spindler, Mr. Herman. And if you don't use your minute, you can add that onto your time.
Oh, very good. Thank you so much. So we support
1 minute, Mr.
Nuri Martinez,
1 minute,
yes. We support Nuri to trash this fucking thing and redo it, yes. So, you know, pigs bank at Wells Fargo. Here, even puppets get credit at Wells Fargo, yes. Yes, it's such a rotten bank, isn't it? And they only do business with white people. Blacks and minorities are not included. But they fund operations against Native Americans. Yes, they do. And because the bank does that, they kill, and steal the land. And yes, the man walking away who has a wife who's black totally understands the conflict of interest.
Stick to the
So
topic.
no,
I'm going to ask you to leave.
no to the fucking Wells Fargo. Yes to Nuri. Yes, that's right. I don't always agree with Nuri, even though we look alike. But today we do. A revolution will begin. Thank you.
So we
Mr. Herman.
can't follow through any better regarding Nuri Martinez, because even she knows that there are predators within Wells Fargo. Families and members of families bullshitted to believe that you can take out any type of credit to purchase a home, and then you find out you're bamboozled by this fucked up housing, and guess what? You don't own your fucking home. So you want me to believe anything else? No. I don't believe further that the bank shall certify in writing any fucked up approved matter of city to utilize their predatory sales. Quote unquote, Nuri Martinez. For once, I got a fat bitch who agrees with me that there's a way to sustain financial product and service, and that's to stay the fuck out of Wells Fargo's business because they're so fucked up predatory and corruption. I can't believe I'm going Jewish.
And for those of you who don't come to our meetings very often, and I know we had a delegation here earlier from another country, I don't think they're still here, but I apologize that sometimes we have to tolerate disgusting, racist, misogynistic, hateful, outrageous, and groundless speech here. It's part of the process. It's part of the democratic process. I apologize to everyone who is offended today or routinely offended when we have to listen to this nonsense every single week and every single meeting. So for those of you who are visiting, my apologies. I know that you're here to exercise your right to petition your government, and to the extent that the abuses by a few inhibits your ability to do that, I regret that very much. So, all right, that brings up our discussion of item number 5. So let me ask the Office of Finance to come forward, please. We're taking them separately. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Todd Booley, Assistant Director with Finance, and with me I'll let the others introduce themselves as also members of the Finance Department.
Tom Juarez, Chief Investment Officer.
Saul Romo.
Chris Herrera, Director of Treasury Services.
And if you'd like, I can start off by giving you a summary of what's before you.
Yes, please.
We have before you have the General Banking Services RFP, and as has been discussed here a bit already, this takes a much different approach from what the city has done in the past. There were many things that were taken into consideration and accounted for herein, including the direction and discussion with committee, reviewing and incorporating what other California jurisdictions are doing, and meeting our objective of establishing an RFP designed to get best-in-class service along individual business lines, along with improving the city's business continuity options, all the while maintaining a manageable operation for the city's treasury services and 40 city departments for the next 5 to 10 years. Under this new RFP, rather than one banking institution has the breadth of services to cover every aspect of city requirements, the city would seek to secure a principal awardee and backup awardee in each of 6 major service categories. In this, we hope to find best-of-class services provided by entities demonstrating a commitment to social responsibility in the communities the city serves. To qualify as a bidder, the banks must have a current overall CRA rating of at least satisfactory at both the national and state level and must maintain that status through the life of the contract. Ongoing compliance with the RBO is also required, including any future amendments. The RFP also requires ongoing disclosure of enforcement actions and certification that bank employees are not measured by illegal practices. Extensive social reporting requirements have been included, accounting for 20% of the first 2 phases of RFP scoring. At the end of the day, we feel we've constructed a fair and responsible banking services RFP that is not only manageable for the city, but which helps the city move forward with best-in-class services and innovative approaches to conducting city business. That said, it will be a lot of work to get there as the review process is extensive and awarding multiple contracts will be time-intensive, but our aim is to achieve this before the end of the fiscal year. We appreciate the Council's consideration of the city's General Banking Services RFP, and we appreciate the opportunity to proceed. And we're here to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. And this is for a 5-year contract period.
Correct, with a renewal option as well for 5 years.
So I guess the first question I have, and I want to open it up to my colleagues before I get too deep into this, but just on that one point, City Council is currently working on the possibility of creating a municipal bank. And we're looking into what services such a bank might be able to provide. Some of the services that we're contracting out through this RFP might be able to be things that we would bring in. So I'm concerned about having a 5-year contract period because I think we may miss the opportunity to do some of those things. We will, I think, lessen the opportunity of holding our successful bidders accountable with that long of a period of time. My preference would be to have a shorter contract term so that we can continually evaluate those who are providing banking services and consider other options and alternatives. But the countervailing concern that I have is that might reduce the number of participants and create a less competitive environment for the bids. So can you comment on the time frame and what impacts that might have?
Sure, and I will mention that the city would presume to have termination clauses in this agreement as well, including the ability to terminate in a 30-day period. The reason for the length of this type of RFP is in large part due to the extensive work that goes into any type of potential transition in banking services.
On the city's part.
On the city's part, and as I mentioned, it impacts every department in the city. Every department is sort of operating its own relationship with the bank to a certain extent, and so all the departments have built in various account structures and technology integrations and business practices, and so it becomes a process of unwinding all of those. And so there is expense associated with that, as well as obviously the time that it takes to go through that. And so that's a big reason for having an extended period of time for the agreement, as well as I think, as you mentioned, it does make it a more attractive agreement from the standpoint of the bidders to know that there's a commitment for that period of time, and hopefully also in consideration the pricing as well.
Okay. But in any event, the contract that would be let for this, all of them would include a 30-day termination clause that would require minimal, if any, cause for termination.
Correct. And because we'd be breaking up the services into smaller components, we should also be able to be a little bit more nimble in terms of what we do and what we're able to move off of or onto as a result.
Okay, very good. Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know in discussions with the city attorney, it seems to be questionable whether we can just eliminate people that we've considered to not be good players. I know right now it's proposed to weigh social responsibility for 20% of the RFP. Do we think that'll be enough to screen out problematic bidders in the RFP process?
We looked at what other jurisdictions have done, at least other major jurisdictions have done recently. We think we're above many, or at least on par with just about any that we've seen in terms of our weighting of that component. And I do believe that it will be a significant factor in terms of determining who would be the bidder or the awardee for these various components of the contract. We did not weight it as heavily as we did for the services being rendered, but it is, I think, high enough that it would be a difference maker in terms of any scoring between two competitive banks.
And I don't know if there's anyone here from the city attorney's office that can appropriately answer the question of why we can't just eliminate folks that have engaged in inappropriate practices.
I'll defer to city attorney, but we do have also a provision in there concerning the Community Reinvestment Act and the scores that banks receive from the federal government. We are maintaining that they need to score at least a satisfactory rating overall, national and state, and otherwise they would be disqualified from bidding or potentially in breach of our agreement with that bank.
So that could also, in addition to the 20%, get at some of the worst actors in the industry.
Definitely.
And what's the definition of social responsibility in this context?
It's really a conglomeration of many things. I'm gonna defer here to Saul Romo to talk a little bit through that section. He's spent quite a bit of time working on that.
Good afternoon. Well, we have quite a large-scale definition and some elements here as to the social responsibility. Similar to the CRA, we're looking at lending practices by the banks. We're looking at some of the quantitative data that is reported pursuant to the CRA. We're looking at the investments in low and moderate income communities to see the extent to which banks are providing affordable housing, investments, let's say, in community revitalization. We're looking at what kinds of philanthropic or charitable approaches the banks have made in the respective communities within the city of Los Angeles. Obviously, we are also trying to mirror very exactly the RBO that the council has adopted and is pondering adopting as well. We are also looking at the breadth of investments, not just in lending and by the bank in respective communities, but how it looks within the bigger picture within the city's geographic boundaries. We want to know where is the bank putting the money and how responsibly, in our opinion, are they really focusing a lot of their business into some of the areas that we feel are underrepresented and need some attention. And finally, we're also asking the banks to provide us with what they feel are some perfectly good examples of programs and initiatives that would demonstrate their actions as a good corporate citizen that they have provided in other cities that they're willing to bring to Los Angeles and to implement here in Los Angeles.
And I know it's been proposed by some that we require banks to eliminate all sales goals. Now, I did a motion which will come under item 4 to strengthen what we're talking about a little bit, but it calls out discriminatory, unfair, deceptive, predatory, abusive, or illegal practices. I'm wondering, though, how realistic it is and legal it is to eliminate all sales goals, because there are legitimate sales goals where you sell a product that is of value and use to your customer, and you have to be able to make some sales. And if you were just a completely incompetent salesperson and you couldn't sell things that were good for your customer because you couldn't communicate that well, at some point there has to be the ability to fire somebody that just can't sell anything, as opposed to a requirement to sell things that are not helpful to the customer, which would be the most modest violation, as opposed to Wells Fargo style, where you actually sell things and don't even tell the customer, or they'd be things the customer absolutely wouldn't want in a million years, and they'd find they have it. So where do we appropriately draw the line?
That's been a very difficult question for us. Obviously, we're well aware of the discussions that have occurred around that, and I think it's been a challenge to identify or to get definitions for certain terms. I know that the financial institutions themselves are concerned, with signing or under penalty of perjury or what have you, that certain practices aren't taking place, not because even if we weren't to say sales in general, but just even predatory sales, not because they necessarily believe that is happening or know that that's happening, but because things do happen or have happened, even where the people in charge may or may not have known. And so there is concern from the financial institution side, certainly on that topic, with regard to what they're able to engage. But on the other side of it, we're also looking at it from this perspective of how do we define or how do we know or enforce that. And it's also very difficult for us, what is predatory to you or I and maybe clearly identifiable to us. It's possible that someone else doesn't see that way, and so what we've done is in this case fallen back on law and in terms of what's legal and illegal as the primary criteria for what's being engaged in at the bank. And so things that are illegal is what we're looking for, as we believe that's the most readily definable criteria. However, we do understand that could be obviously subject to a great deal of discussion, as has been to this point.
And certainly the argument that this kind of thing could have happened without the top people knowing about it, that might have been valid when it happened, but now we have the example. Everybody knows the kinds of things that happened and the fact that they are blatantly illegal and unacceptable. And so I think it would be much harder for a mid-level manager to say, oh, go ahead and do this now, write accounts for people that don't know about it, because it's been so much on the table and so clear. I think it's no longer a concern that we could ban predatory practices and that they would be going on anyway. I just don't think that's realistic.
Mr. Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few questions following up on the questions from both of my colleagues. One, I was intrigued by the question from the chair about whether or not we could have a period of time shorter than 5 years, because there are services we may want to be providing from a municipally owned bank. There may, in fact, be services we need to provide in order to make the bank a viable operation. And you said that we would be able to terminate early with 30 days. At what cost? I assume it's not a no penalty termination, is it?
I believe, as I understand it, we would be able to to terminate within 30 days. We would have to clear any expenses that were due within that time period, as well as whatever transitional costs we may incur as a result. But correct me if I'm wrong, City Attorney, on that, but that's my understanding, is that we wouldn't negotiate or agree to have a penalty as a result of terminating for that purpose.
So we're proposing a better deal than a consumer gets from a cell phone company.
Probably so.
Because, I mean, you terminate your cable, you terminate your cell phone, there's a penalty. I want to make sure, if we're saying we have a provision for a termination, that it's not something that if we try to do it, it's going to come back and say, oh, council members, if you do this, we're going to have X come down and hit you on the head.
Well, the termination provisions can always be a matter of negotiation between us and the bank. And we would obviously seek to have the termination clauses which are in the best interest of the city. So the time period is something that we can negotiate, and we want to be sensitive to the impact operationally on the departments to say we're going to transition services within 30 days or whether it's 45 days. But in terms of the cost, if we're simply making a termination out of an item of convenience where there's something that's not strictly contractually obligating the bank or the service provider to a particular service standard, then we're making the decision because it's convenient for us. We will be incurring that cost to a certain degree, if not entirely. Now, if we built in a standard in our agreement, let's say maintaining a minimal CRA requirement, and the bank happens to find that its score has been reduced, we could hold the bank accountable to that standard in the contract and point to it and say, you haven't fulfilled your obligation of this contractual agreement, we're going to terminate the service. And at that point, we would seek to have any costs incurred for a termination for cause or for breach recovered by the bank as we transition the services. I'm sorry, that's maybe a little bit of a convoluted response, but I'm trying to make certain that we try and capture as many of the perspectives as possible.
It was a little convoluted, but uncharacteristically, I appreciated it this time because it triggered something else in my head. Short of, say their CRA score goes down. Say we discover during the course of this that they have engaged in predatory lending practices. Probably wouldn't be shocking. Do we have options of things short of termination? Can a lower score, evidence of them having committed predatory lending, allow us to charge a penalty to them?
We could, and I guess we could always implement opportunities for remedial action or consequences, because we wouldn't want to be so strict to say you've violated this provision or you haven't met up to the standard, we're terminating you, but it has an indirect impact on our operational necessities as well. We could certainly build that in as a contractual requirement or seek to build it in as a contractual negotiation item.
The reason I suggest it is, short of our having our own municipally owned bank, I think, at least if the conversation we had the last time this was before this committee is true, we're not going to find a financial institution to bank with that is angelic. We're going to have, wherever we go, we're going to find something that dings their social responsibility score or their CRA score. And generally, the city doesn't do a very good job of enforcing the things that we all say we want the city to do. And I'd want to see us be able to build something in here that has some accountability, whether it's a fee or, I'm open to other ideas. But I think having that in there would be worthwhile because it provides a genuine disincentive to poor behavior if it's actually, a worthwhile fee, if it's not just cost of doing business. The other thing I wanted to ask about, you talked about how you mentioned in passing things other jurisdictions have done. I'd love to see before this, I don't know if we're going to keep this here today or send it to council, but before it gets to council, if you could prepare for us a matrix of what other cities have done in terms of responsible banking, predatory lending stuff, what they've done, which city, and whether or not we have it incorporated in ours, because I'd like to see, if there are things other cities have done that we haven't done, I'd like to know that so we can push back on that and tease that out. Might be very good reasons why not, but I'd like to know that.
Sure.
The final thing is, Mr. Koretz was asking what the definition is of social responsibility, and I appreciated the different explanations you gave. I'm curious, though, if the various things you said are weighted differently. And the reason I ask is when we last had this in committee, I remember quoting Dickens, the best of times and the worst of times, because we heard some wonderful things about one of the companies, and we heard some horrible things about one of the companies. And I wouldn't want us to have somebody who has a really bad record at predatory lending be able to get a good score because they sponsor a Pop Warner football league. So how do we structure that so that purely being philanthropic isn't a way of compensating for doing a lot of bad predatory lending practices?
It's right now there's let's say a 20% bucket for the social responsibility piece, of which there are a variety of different components. And ultimately, it does come down to the rating team and their assessment and evaluation of the information that's presented there. It doesn't go so far to say as to striate that 20 points into different smaller buckets. But I do believe that there is enough confluence of information there that they should be able to make a very balanced evaluation as to both the pluses and minuses of the institutions. There could, of course, be differences between individual raters in terms of how they evaluate, but that is also something then that they would discuss within themselves as well as to how they got to where they got to in evaluating these institutions and in applying that score. So that I can't say for sure how exactly the scoring would pan out in that. Other than that, I do believe we do have struck a pretty good balance in terms of what we're asking them to report. But I believe that it is a lot of the information there is going to be skewed towards what sort of enforcement actions have occurred with them in the past 5 years, whether or not they're providing the lending to low and moderate income communities. And so a lot of the different components to which they're responding is really putting the onus on them to demonstrate that they are achieving these things. And to a lesser degree, they also have the opportunity then to identify other things that they're doing that they feel are a benefit to the community as well, that we're not necessarily asking specifically about.
If I could also add that there is a qualitative element to this as well as a heavy quantitative element. We are asking for some data, but we're also, for instance, asking for their latest CRA reports. And if let's say a bank says, well, we sponsored an affordable housing project in Pacoima, well, we will have an opportunity to subjectively challenge them and ask them, tell us about this project. Who are your partners? What led to your participation? What was the result? Are you open to doing this in San Pedro? Are you open to doing this in Boyle Heights? And so there is a qualitative element in those reports that we can review and to which we can bring the banks here and challenge them on that information. And so I think at some point it'll be a subjective issue for the individual raters, what matters more to one evaluator as opposed to another.
Yeah, that doesn't quite give me the assurance I was hoping for. I mean, I think there's a way we could structure it. I mean, I assume, does this set, what the RFP here, does this set how each panel would evaluate, or do we get to determine how the panels evaluate further along in the process?
This is pretty much the guide by which the panel would be evaluating. So this sets the expectations in terms of what the institutions would be reporting, and so this is what the panel would be reviewing against. I guess the way we would move it more towards looking at more, perhaps the more negative aspects of their interactions, is we would remove certain portions that request them to identify what their charitable giving is and some of those aspects. And that is a way we could remove that from the equation.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what the rest of the committee thinks. I just don't want us to be in a situation where you can use charitable giving as the predatory lending equivalent of greenwashing and not have the other really systemic offenses count against you. That's what I'm looking at. And then I guess that was my final question. I thought I had something else I can't remember.
So on that point, I think that's a point that we always wrestle with every RFP, is how do we evaluate the evaluators, right, and what they go in. But for those who might not have seen it, who are in the audience, in the draft RFP, starting on page 90 and through page 98, there's pretty thorough discussion of what the evaluators will have to evaluate. Your point is well taken about corporate giving and philanthropy and how much that might be weighted, and also how much that influences supporters to come in and speak on behalf of an institution. But on the other hand, we do have evaluation will be compliance with the responsible banking ordinance, with the responsible banking investment monitoring program, pending or recent enforcement actions, the bank's consumer practices, evaluation with the Community Reinvestment Act, its CRA rating, its lending activity to small businesses, community development loans, and so on, its home mortgage loans practices, activities in minority and women-owned financial institutions, low-income credit unions, education loans, consumer loans, community investments in affordable housing and environmental or community services, small business investment, community banking services, and then you get to corporate citizenship, which includes, as one component of it, the corporate philanthropy, but it also includes many other things, social investments, environmental concerns, and so on. So to the extent that we can work this into the drafting, I think it's, I think Mr. Bonner's point is very well taken. We have a lot in here that the evaluators should be looking at. I just wouldn't want it to be so loose that somebody hangs up on one of those many components and says, that's the thing I care about, and disregards the fact that the council is instructing that they care about all of these things. So I don't know how you work that into the drafting, but...
Chair, can I make one suggestion just on this point?
Kretz.
One possibility, and I don't know if it's too extreme or not, would be that if you qualify as a bad actor under one category, that your ability to include your philanthropic activities, et cetera, is eliminated, so that you could only include all those good things if you are found to be a good actor and not have points against you for predatory lending or other bad practices.
It would make sense, except I don't know that we know what the scoring system would be to determine who's a good and bad actor on some of these things. But maybe if they fall below a certain threshold on one category, then community giving
would be something that couldn't be considered.
I think you've heard this, and this is more a question of what goes into the scoring system, first of all, but also into the contract.
Yeah, I think we understand where you're going with it, and maybe if we can take not too long, but a little time to contemplate that and come back with how we can tweak this to meet that goal.
Very good, Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, along the same lines. I mean, it's tricky to figure this out, because if we're too prescriptive about it, we also, and too quantitative about it, we open ourselves up for lawsuits. Everybody's suing on the point system. But if we're too open about it, then we could get caught up in this situation that we're talking about, where they get caught up on one thing or another. And like my colleagues, I don't want to see being able to sort of buy your way into social responsibility with small little investments that don't don't mean a lot. At the same time, I don't want to discourage that. I mean, we certainly want people to continue to support all the little leagues and all that stuff, but that we need to have folks who are looking at social responsibility, be smart enough to see through those kinds of things. And that sort of brings me to the question about, who are we actually relying on as the evaluator? So if you could talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. We've discussed and we've had some preliminary conversations with different departments in terms of establishing an evaluation team. We would have a couple, probably 2 to 3 members of finance, and then probably 2 to 3 members of external departments who are more significant users of banking services. I don't want to commit anyone yet because we haven't gotten to commitments, but there have been several offices that have expressed interest in participating, such as with proprietary departments in particular.
Would there be any opportunity for outside groups outside of the city to be able to participate in the social responsibility ranking?
Right. We've had the city of San Francisco offered to lend a rater to us as well, their Treasury Services Director, and that's someone that we could also certainly call to participate, as they've already offered.
But in terms of, and I guess taking input from organizations is part of it, but we wouldn't have someone from an outside organization be part of this, is that correct?
In my experience in the past, not typically, but I don't know if we've seen that in other examples or not.
I can't think of an example where, at least some of the agencies where we looked at how they pursued their particular RFP process, where that was the model that they used.
I mean, I'd be interested in the pros and cons of that in terms of having someone from the philanthropic world, from the, from one of the major foundations or some group like that could be useful and is certainly worth looking at.
Right. There is another item that I believe you had brought up previously about forming sort of a committee to look at sort of these social responsibility elements, and that's something that we have briefly had some discussions with other city departments, and I think it's something that we need to still continue to work on. And we kind of have sort of promoted and pushed forward the RFP, and I think hopefully there's a lot of good elements we can take from this, but there may be we still need to come back, I think, on that topic because a lot of the what will be in the RBO and perhaps what will be in this RFP and other RFPs going forward, I think there may be benefit ultimately to having such a type of review. Because I think one of the things is we're talking about sort of some element of subjectivity in scoring and how do you weight things, is that as we move forward and we're kind of the first out of the gate on this with social responsibility, there's going to be other institutions in the city that are also going to be maybe doing similar types of evaluations and ratings on these financial institutions, and there would probably be benefit to having the ability to make sure that there is a good amount of consistency as we move forward from RFP to RFP, effectively reviewing a lot of the same institutions with similar criteria. And so that's my, I guess, saying that perhaps that's something we can still come back to and report back on, and working perhaps with the CAO to report back because there are a number of different departments, potentially that would have interest in that.
As mentioned last time, something I'm very interested in seeing that kind of participation and figuring out how we can integrate it. And I know it's tricky too, because when you're dealing with giving away funds, anybody involved in that process, if it's not purely advisory, has to fill out all the different ethics forms and all the rest, and so it's not simple, but I think it is worthwhile in terms of pursuing. I was very interested in knowing a little bit more about what and so the matrix concept that Mr. Bonin mentioned, I think, is critically important for us to see what other cities have done and haven't done to be able to gauge where we are. You mentioned that we're on par in terms of the social responsibility aspect. Is there any city that weighs it more that you know of?
Not that I saw. San Francisco and Seattle. I think Seattle was
San Francisco and
somewhat,
Seattle probably have some of the more aggressive approaches toward the social responsibility elements that we looked at. And we definitely found elements in their process that we liked and have incorporated into this process.
But they don't have more than 20% waiting.
No, and actually there were some, interestingly enough, some models we looked at that didn't even score the social responsibility.
Seattle had about a 15% in their last, and San Francisco had about 5% in their last RFP.
So San Francisco's 5%, Seattle's 15%.
Wow.
What we're proposing is higher than the two of them put together.
Correct.
Well, equal to the two of them together. That's a good thing. But I'd love to see the matrix to see it all put together.
Sure.
The social response, so seeing what other cities have done. Oh, the sales goals or commissions. You know, we kind of left that out on the theory, I guess, that there are positive things that commissions can bring versus negatives. Is that, did you guys think about that in terms of, you know, certainly it's been suggested to us that we eliminate anybody who has any sort of sales goals.
Right.
What's the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, certainly that's a topic that we struggle with, and something that we've had various conversations with with the city attorney, and we had a lot of challenge trying to figure out how we could put into place something where, you know, we of course allow for a competitive bidding environment, but also something that we could enforce on our side. I don't know that we came up with any really great solutions to that problem. Obviously, you know, it remains a matter of debate, and you heard in the public comments today that there's a lot of desire to continue to have that discussion. And what we ended up falling back on was, well, what can we really rely on? We don't really have necessarily we have a comprehension of what it means to be predatory, but not necessarily a real strong definition or where we would have purview or necessarily know when it was occurring, as opposed to when an enforcement agency comes in and basically sets down that what you're doing is illegal or against their codes, in which case that's where we're kind of hanging our hat to say, okay, that's when we know you've done something wrong.
It's tricky, and I remember I was at the state level dealing with some questions about annuities and when those are predatory and non-predatory, and I don't remember exactly how we handled it, but there was some element of it where you determined if it was actually something in the person's interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how that can be applied, but and I can go back and look at some of that as well. But where because the trick is, how do you determine what's predatory and what's not predatory? And one way to determine that is if an objective person would say that what the product that you've sold this person is actually in their interest.
Right.
And if it's not in their interest, then it's predatory.
Right.
And I know it was done with annuities. Was a lot of legislation around that, so maybe there's something there that we can model after. I don't know, but it's certainly something that I'm interested in.
Okay, we can look into that.
Most of the social responsibility stuff, or the big items, were kind of threshold items that you mentioned which are good. The connection to the Community Reinvestment Act rating, responsible banking ordinance, pending enforcement actions, all of those were pretty much threshold. So I assume most of the distinctions would come on all those other elements as opposed to the big threshold ones. But I did have a question about the pending investigation or enforcement action. All bidders must disclose any pending investigation or enforcement action. How do you figure out what is a pending investigation? Because it seems that could be so broad to some extent. You know, complaint-driven investigations are numerous, and at what point does it rise to the threshold of having to be reported, or is there a way to cure if you haven't reported it? I don't know. It just seems like it's certainly our interest. We want to see everything reported, but we also we don't want to create such a morass that we get so much reported that it doesn't actually mean anything.
Right. That's a good
So
question.
just to add on to that, and also what the scope of investigation and enforcement is. I mean, it might be things unrelated to banking activity. It could be any number of other things. So it almost becomes like a securities disclosure form at some point if you include everything.
And is it investigation by a government entity? Which government entity? And then I guess you also run into the problem, you don't want to have a chilling effect on investigations. If it includes any sort of self-investigation, if the bank creates an investigation because of a practice, we want to know about the problems, but we don't want to create a perverse incentive where people don't investigate. So I don't know the answer to that, but I got a little concerned with the breadth and the lack of scope on that requirement, even though I'm fundamentally behind the intention of the requirement. I just don't know how it's going to work in practice the way it's written.
Sure. This was largely a discussion from, I guess, months ago, and a report that was brought forward, basically on this same topic, and so we were incorporating that information here. I agree. It certainly can be broad, and right now we're basically saying investigation enforcement undertaken by federal, state, or local agencies against the respondent. I know that one of the concerns when this was brought up several months ago from the banking institutions was the local component in particular. They were concerned that identifying every possible action undertaken at the local level may be very difficult for them, especially on a nationwide basis. And so that was a concern that they expressed. Otherwise, it's essentially the way I'm interpreting it is that it's essentially anything public that's occurring from a regulatory agency with regard to the bank, and it could be well beyond consumer practices and certainly go into securities and potentially other areas. We can certainly narrow it according to what our primary interests might be, and or to certain jurisdictions or certain types of federal agencies as well. And I'm sure that would make it a lot simpler that people could comply with this requirement.
And I guess, simple, part of the goal, and I guess related to that goal, less about simplicity and more about legal liability. I worry that whatever we do here, after we issue the RFP, we're going to get sued by whoever loses. And so maybe as part of the report backs to get a sense of where, how, I don't want to identify what the legal vulnerabilities are. Maybe that's the wrong way to ask the question, but how do we strengthen the process so to inoculate ourselves as much as possible from legal liabilities? Just because when you're dealing with these litigious groups or banks, that they're certainly going to sue.
Sure, we'll work further with city attorney to work on that clause.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Englander? You good? Okay. So we've talked about a number of things that we're going to have a little bit deeper look at, and then I think the expectation is to report back to this committee, but I'm also concerned about timing. So if we were to hear back from you in response to the comments that you've heard today when we next meet, which is I think November, the end of this month, November 27th, is it, Matt? First of all, would that give you enough time to be able to look at the things and provide the information that we've asked for? And then second, if it does that still allow sufficient time to be able to proceed with the entire process, approval by council, post the RFP, get the responses and everything in time to meet finance's requirements.
Yeah, we'll certainly give it priority, and we'll bring everything we possibly can to the next committee meeting, and hopefully that will be everything that you've asked for here. I will certainly intend to, and I think we definitely, to the extent that we can move forward within the next month, we do have probably some flex time, and in terms of getting to when we actually get to signed agreements, hopefully before the end of the year. But obviously, when you get into the contract negotiation process, sometimes it can take far longer than we anticipate, and we get into a lot of weeds. And particularly with this agreement being a lot different than others in the past that we've asked for signatures on, I'm sure there will be a lot of details that will have a lot of back and forth on. And the fact that we're doing at least half a dozen or 12 potentially agreements here probably will take some time too. But that being said, we want to get it right also. So I think that we'll figure out a way to make it all work and get back here as soon as we can with further information to kind of help refine things so that we can move forward. I think that if there are certain things, and depending on what they are, and based on the council's will, of course, where if we don't get certain things resolved, but they're potentially things that are overlapping with the responsible banking ordinance at all, then potentially those things can continue to be resolved in the ordinance, and whatever's adopted in the ordinance would ultimately apply to what we have, what we end up doing with any of the financial institutions we do business with.
Okay, thank you. So we have a little bit of flexibility to cover some of the areas that we've discussed. But I have to admit, members, I didn't take very good notes of all the things we said we were going to discuss. So we were going to look at other cities, comparing best practices and what they have in their ordinances. We were going to look at whether we can address the scoring criteria, especially around social responsibility, in a way that doesn't create the adverse impact that Mr. Bonner described. We were going to look at whether or not there could be some accountability measures short of termination, so that we can have some kind of penalties that don't necessarily require the death penalty.
Mm-hmm. Also, I have looking at pending enforcement actions.
Yes, and how to define
and
the scope
how
of
to better define
enforcement. Right.
And also how to define or take a look at predatory sales practices and how that might be defined as well.
On that note, can I add
Yes, Mr. Blumenfield.
I mentioned the annuity thing, and while we're talking, I looked up my bill on annuities at the state level. It was AB 689. And what it required, which might be useful here, is it required that insurers verify that an annuity purchased is suitable and appropriate for the consumer based on an evaluation of his or her age, income, financial objective, and 10 other factors. And that was signed into law and is currently being used. Granted, it's limited to annuities, but maybe that kind of model can help us on this predatory versus non-predatory loan situation.
Thanks. Well, thanks for reference.
Anything else? Mr. Kretz.
And that's something I mentioned earlier, but not in such a direct example, that an appropriate sale is one where it's beneficial to the consumer. It's true of annuities. It's true of a variety of things. That's probably really where the fine point is, that if you're selling something that the consumer actually needs, that it's appropriate. If you're trying to sell them something just so your sales can go up, that's obviously not appropriate. Although most of the things done by banks that were in violation were so much worse than that you're not close to it, but that's really where the line should be drawn.
Okay. Anything else, members? All right. Then, given the substantive discussion and comments that we've had, what I'd recommend is that we ask that Finance report back in consultation with the City Attorney, report back here with further response to the issues that have been raised by the committee, and we'll hold the matter in committee until we get that response back, which hopefully will be at our November 27th meeting. All right? Without objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you very much. Thanks for your good work, and that brings up item number 4.
Item number 4 is the City Attorney Report and Ordinance relative to amending the Los Angeles Administrative Code regarding the Responsible Banking Investment Monitoring Program to require commercial and investment banks which seek city business to disclose any pending government investigations in their business practices, certify they have written whistleblower protection policies, and certify that they are in compliance with all applicable consumer protection laws.
Thank you. Before we begin with the report, I'm going to go ahead and take the public comment on this matter. So we'll start with Aparna Bakli, followed by Michelle Milner, followed by Trinity Tran, followed by Javier Sarmiento.
Thank you for the opportunity again. I just want to say that I think it's rich that we're discussing a lot of these things while Wells Fargo is a bad actor and has been proven to be a bad actor, and the fact that there's still potential concessions that can be made for the city to continue its banking services with Wells Fargo is shocking.
So we're on the responsible banking ordinance now. So Michelle Milner, followed by Trinity Tran, followed by Javier Sarmiento.
Hi. So I think that in the responsible banking ordinance, we can capture some of the, perhaps the negative investments that are potentially harmful to the citizens, and say that, for example, private prisons, investments in the fossil fuel industry, investments in firearms, those maybe could be considered where we wouldn't want to deal with banks that have significant investments in those areas. That also might help us define social responsibility. I noticed that in the RFP, there wouldn't be any banks that have investments in the border wall. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. We could have something like that for the Dakota Access Pipeline, which hasn't been mentioned at all in the responsible banking ordinance, and that would maybe under fossil fuels. So right now, the responsible banking ordinance is sort of general, but we might want to consider some of those industries where we don't want to have, the banks investing in those industries.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Trinity Tran. Thank you. Our next speaker is Javier Sarmiento, followed by Patrick Smith, followed by Orino Opinaldo. Oh, and momento.
Gracias otra vez, soy Javier Sarmiento, Distrito 6.
Thanks again. I'm Javier Sarmiento from District 6.
Lo que yo quiero proponerles hoy es que si van a trabajar con el Wells Fargo Bank, que trabajen conjuntamente para que ayuden a las minorías, porque yo no he visto hasta ahora que un banco llegue a Pacoima a abrir negocios para ayudar a la comunidad.
I'd like to suggest that if you're going to continue working with Wells Fargo, that you require them to work in minority communities. For example, I don't see them coming to Pacoima to help support businesses and things of that nature.
Yo no miro que ellos vayan para ofrecer algo constructivo. Van ahí para hacer negocio, mirando a ver qué van a hacer, presionar a sus empleados a que hagan las ventas y tengan las cuotas que hasta hoy.
What I do see them doing in our communities is pressuring their workers to sell us things that we don't need, that are high-cost products.
Y ustedes tienen el poder hoy de hacerlo y que los bancos sean que sean que lo estén mirando, porque hasta hoy no se puede, no hay alguien que está haciendo el trabajo como debe ser.
So you have the power to require that through the contract and through the evaluation process. Thank you.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
Thank you, sir. Gracias. Our next speaker is Patrick Smith, followed by Orino Pinaldo, followed by Beverly Roberts. Mr. Smith, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What I noticed in regards to your discussion is that you have not made emphasis in predatory banking practices in regards to the sales goals. There's nothing wrong with having sales goals that is not predatory. So I think you should emphasize on the fact that predatory sales goal is a no-no. Another thing in regards to these banks, the RBO should be well strengthened with enough teeth to make sure that these banks don't have their own way with the customers. Because without a strong RB, it's useless. They'll be back to square one. So I urge you to see to it that strong language is in the RB to make sure that they don't get back to square one in regards to ripping us off.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Orino Pinaldo, followed by Beverly Roberts, followed by Georgette Sharp. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I'll continue, which was important, how my granddaughter lost everything. Wells Fargo said my granddaughter to be fired by someone stealing several $1,000s out of her cash drawer as she was on the bathroom break. She was accused of taking the money, and she commented, check the camera to know who went there. The manager of Wells Fargo refused, and she lost her job, and all other in finances. To this day, her young life has been in pain and difficult. That's why I'm saying that we need this handled, because my granddaughter is in so much pain because she can't do what she wants in finances. I am separated from my 18 grandchildren and family because that bank predatory sales goal have done this to me. And I ask you to make sure that you have rules that doesn't happen anymore. I've experienced in all these things in my whole family. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Beverly Roberts, followed by Maria Loya, followed by Joanne Dangan.
Sir, can I ask a question before I say my little
Yes,
blurb? I don't understand, I can only speak for myself because I got into a predatory loan, but I did get a modification. But the thing is, the modification is set up where I'm only paying $2.16 toward the principal. I don't think that's right when I've been in my home for 17 years.
Okay, well, that's not so much a question for me, so maybe.
I know, but I'm just putting that out there. I'm
Okay.
trying to show you the frustrations that somebody like me had, and there's many more.
I understand.
Okay, but what I'm saying is the banks would just pay us back.
Okay.
Maybe that would help.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
let me finish my.
Yes, please.
So to the Budget and the Finance Committee, I say, it's time to require that banks getting our money don't use predatory sales goals. But that's not the only thing. We got all these other things, like the predatory loans, because I'm caught up with that. So, and there's so many of us. And I've seen so many people lose their homes, like Arenio, the one that just spoke. And it's just so unfair. Why can't they just give us some money back? Maybe that would help.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. All right. So our next speaker is Maria Loya, followed by Joanne Danganen, followed by Jason Lane.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for taking this on. I think that it's something that's very important. The responsible banking ordinance needs to be updated. And one of the things that we're seeing is that the bank lobby has been successful in putting out a false narrative around the kind of business they do. They are trying to say that they are just like any other retail business and that they should be able to use sales goals without any restrictions. The fact is that banks are not like any other retail business, and the financial products that they're selling is tied to debt. And what we have seen when we've talked to bank workers is that the unauthorized accounts is just the tip of the iceberg. What's happening with these sales goals is that they are targeting the most vulnerable in our communities. And when they do that, they're not asked to go thoroughly through the whole complicated aspects of the financial products that they're pushing. And that's what we mean about addressing predatory sales goals.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Joanne Danganen, followed by Jason Lane, followed by Peter Coons.
Good afternoon. I'm Joanne Danganen here on behalf of Central City Association. We understand the city wishes to amend the responsible banking ordinance and want to make sure it's done in a manner that is thoughtful. The California Banking Association has submitted a letter, and we ask that you take that into account for their suggestions. We also ask that you continue this item for 2 weeks to allow a working group to come together to develop amending language which is clear and constructive. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Lane, good afternoon.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Jason Lane with the California Bankers Association. Many of the points I'll articulate are contained in the letter. Essentially, we're very concerned. We represent most of the banks in California, and I think I can count on one hand the number of institutions that can handle the size and complexity of the city of Los Angeles' business. And we're concerned that the existing draft language really boxes the council and the city into a corner. There are vague terms that are contained in the existing draft language. We're very concerned about the disclosure of pending investigations, many of which are generally found meritless, particularly when they are complaint-driven. Those that do warrant your consideration, that result in actionable fines and penalties, can already be found publicly on the FDIC and the Consumer Protection Bureau's website. Those are enforcement actions. And we question the need for such a vast disclosure, which creates an undue compliance burden. We're also concerned about the certification under penalty of perjury that thousands of bank employees are somehow in compliance with all laws. Okay. We think there's a better way to do this, and we ask for our assistance if we could work together and draft the RBO.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Peter Coons, followed by Rob Kwan.
Good afternoon, council members. Peter Coons from ASIN CBB, and myself and Patrick Smith are also residents of District 11. We appreciate the work that's been done so far, but as it stands, both the RFP and the RBO amendments address responsible banking in name only. One of the main impetus of the language in the first place was the sales goal scandal, which, as Councilman Koretz referred to, does not just result in phony accounts, but also in legal, unfortunately, targeting of immigrants, seniors, low-income people to push products that they don't need. So how is it possible that both of these two items have no language right now that refer to sales goals at all? That just blows my mind. Instead, what's in there is language that's preferred by bank lobbyists, like the person that just talked, that talks about illegal activity. Well, not all of the sales goal scandal was created through illegal activity. So if you don't want to work with us, I hope that you'll work with your colleague, Councilmember Martinez, because she suggested some concrete proposals on how to define predatory sales goals and make sure we're not doing business with them or banks that support the Dakota Access Pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rob Kwan, followed by Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman.
Hi. I'd like to make sure that we consider what's happening at a national level. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is being whittled away. Some recent rules that allowed for class action lawsuits against banks have been overturned, and I think that just heightens the importance of this matter. We're going to see further deregulation, consumers forced into arbitration clauses, which I know this council doesn't like. Predatory sales goals force workers to choose between their jobs and going after their fellow citizens. The burden is always going to fall amongst those most vulnerable communities like the elderly, the poor, people of color, and undocumented. I think back to, as a good example there's no easy bright line here. I registered voters for the Obama campaign in Las Vegas in 2008, and we had no requirements for numbers we had to hit. Republicans got pluses for registering Republicans, zeros for nonpartisans, and negative points for registering Democrats. There were a number of groups that had people out there registering voters as well. Some of them had 17 forms per day they had to hit. Some had 31 or they were fired. And those workers that were told you have to register voters or get fired were the ones that were trading forms with Republicans to send them Republican forms and get back Democratic forms. So I just think that there's a way that we can do this. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Mr. Spindler, Mr. Herman.
So this is what we got here. And I think the one lady said it right. Her former owners are still owning these goddamn banks. And I think what we need to do is have minority-owned business banks. All of these stocks, they're owned by the Jews. We need to eliminate that and require no more than 20% of Hebrew ownership of these banks doing business with the city and the majority of these contracts. That's why in this budget committee, you don't see any Asians, you don't see any Latinos, you don't see any blacks. The 3 Jews that are on the council are all on this panel. The rest of them are all rich white. And that's why people come in here, if you don't have at least a net worth of $1 million, they don't give a fuck about you or the interest you hold or the house you lost or anything. Now, I go into Wells Fargo, and they deal with me, but if my skin was black, I'd be lynched coming into the bank. Fuck Wells Fargo and fuck you.
Mr. Herman.
So sticking to 12101, based on my ability to perform this task, you see, you fucking predators have continued to lobby with the lobbyists. And I don't know why the fuck you think you can get away with it, but it's going to stop eventually. Because there's some stupid schmuck Jewish motherfucker that's going to get up here one day and just point out all the facts why you fucking 3 dumbass Jews can't get their shit together and take me off that fucking tree that you put me on. Predatory loans, predatory stealing, predatory gains to who? Lobbyists and the stupid, fucked up, dumb motherfuckers of this city that allow Wells Fargo to fuck with people's lives. So under 42 U.S.C. 1983, fuck you and fuck your system.
Thank you, and that exhausts your 2 minutes, so you won't be heard on items 1 through 3. All right. I think that concludes our comment on this matter, so we'll go to the report.
Good afternoon, Valentin Dinu, City Attorney's Office. In response to the Council's directions in this matter, we have prepared and transmitted an amendment, a draft of the proposed amendment to Section 20.95.1 of the Administrative Code, which amends the so-called Responsible Banking Ordinance. And the amendment, the draft in this case, basically requires additional disclosures from banks that seek city business. And in broad terms, those disclosures are disclosing any pending investigation and enforcement action undertaken by federal, state, or local agencies against the bank, then certification that the bank has whistleblower protection policies for bank workers who report suspected illegal banking practices to law enforcement authorities, and finally, certifying that the bank is currently in compliance with all applicable consumer financial protection laws.
All right. Have we, well, let's go first with Mr. Kratz. Mr. Kratz.
Yeah, I have to ask, first of all, a question I asked under item 5, and it wasn't really answered, but I thought I could just ask again here. Why can't we completely exclude the banks that have engaged in bad practices rather than just giving them a slightly lower rating?
The decision that ultimately the City Council and anybody that deals with money has to make is primarily based on financial criteria. The social criteria, as important as it is not something that state law contemplates as being the primary focus of financial relationship between institutions such as banks and public institutions such as the City of Los Angeles. In other words, well, let me tell you specifically what state law requires. State law currently requires that people charged with handling public funds, first of all, safeguard the principal. Second, state law requires that liquidity is insured, liquidity of the public funds is insured, and finally, that there is a rate of return. If the focus is strictly on the social responsibility, the social aspect of contracting, it's basically at that point, if those are the only institutions, the so-called questionable actors, social actors, are the only, if the questionable social actors are the only people that respond to an RFP, at that point, you cannot have a proper contract, a financial services contract that would comply with city law. If your focus is strictly on social responsibility.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understand that logic.
Well,
so only the bad players respond, or if only the bad players respond, then we automatically eliminate all of them. We don't have a bidder, is what you're saying.
You could, absolutely, but you cannot make a decision strictly on social responsibility while the financial responsibility is totally ignored. The financial aspect of the financial strength and the institution's ability to provide the services is quite important, is viewed as paramount under state law.
Well, I understand that in one direction. Obviously, I could create the Bank of Paul Koretz, and I'd be very socially responsible, but I know nothing about banking, so you wouldn't want to choose me. On the other hand, you could...
I'd invest.
Where you have all the banks, if you just eliminated the worst actors, you'd still have the next worst actors that were still fiscally responsible.
If the pool of applicants is sufficient, you can eliminate pretty much anyone you want to eliminate, as long as the criteria is disclosed up front in the RFP.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds a little less clear than some of our previous discussions with the city attorney's office that said absolutely it just couldn't be done under any circumstances. So under that assumption, I have a motion that amends your motion that still makes it somewhat in the same direction as item 5, that says, one, that whistleblower protections have to be certified as available by the banks, and that they receive lower evaluation scores if they've engaged in discriminatory, unfair, deceptive, predatory, abusive, or illegal practices. If we could go further and give them more dramatically lower evaluation scores or eliminate them completely, I'd be happier. It's not that clear to me whether we legally can get there or whether we could go further in that direction.
Well, basically, the ordinance only requires banks to give you information. What you do with the information is your choice at that point. And if you decide that that you will not do business with certain institutions that you find objectionable, you could do so, but without jeopardizing the duty to safeguard public funds.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly where that leaves us. But I certainly would like us to consider going as far as we can. And in the meantime, I have a motion before this committee under item number 4 that goes as far as I understood that we could. I don't object to going further if we find that we are legally able to do so.
Okay. We have that. We'll come back to that in a moment after everyone's had a chance to speak. Mr. Bonner?
Thank you. Let me just ask you a couple clarifying questions, one from either side of the discussion. We heard a considerable amount of testimony regarding the lack of inclusion of language regarding sales quotas, predatory or otherwise. We've heard arguments against both types. What is our legal ability to put in a prohibition against sales quotas? Well, that's my first question.
Okay, that's a little different. Prohibiting the bank from doing something is not within the purview of the City of Los Angeles, because that would be a regulatory action. The city here today is acting as a market participant, and it can choose to do business with an institution that it finds acceptable. But certain groups, banks being one of them, cannot be regulated at the municipal level. That field is preempted mostly by the federal law.
But we're not regulating them. We're just saying you can't apply if. Isn't that a big legal distinction?
If you are saying we are not going to do business with you, if you have certain types of quotas, that could be acceptable depending on how you define it, because there could be a definition that's vague and cannot be upheld in a court of law.
Okay, so could we do a provision that said the RFP or the provision of the Responsible Banking Ordinance regarding quotas, or do we have to do it about predatory quotas?
In our view, in my office's view, the best way to approach this, you can use the term predatory, but the best way to define it, because that's where the issue really lies, is to define it in such a way that would be acceptable and defensible if we ever have to go to court to defend the city's decision. And frankly, the best way to define the term predatory or the term unethical would be to characterize it as an illegal act.
Well, but as some of the folks who've testified earlier have said, not all of the practices were illegal or there was a guilty verdict or anything like that. I mean, some of them were widespread and there's been no prosecution. Do we know what other jurisdictions have done on this? Have there been other jurisdictions that have put prohibitions upon predatory lending or sales quotas?
That might be a better question for finance. They've looked into this, into this comparison between various jurisdictions. Again, the terms used have to be defined in such a way that they are defensible. Illegal is something that basically a judge would understand. It violates a statute or some other principle of law. Terms such as predatory, unethical, they could mean and often do different things to different people.
So can Office of Finance answer my question? Does anybody know?
It's still here. Relating to how other cities have dealt with this in parallel RBOs.
Have other cities in their responsible banking ordinances had prohibitions on sales quotas or on at least predatory quotas?
I have not seen that specifically, or at least noted that. But in the prior item, as we were instructed to go back and pull that information, we'll certainly look at that as part of the criteria and report back with that for the 27th meeting as well.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to. Are we holding this as well to move in tandem with the RFP?
It's going to be my suggestion that we do.
Okay.
others feel.
No, I
strongly
would
otherwise,
support
because
that, because then
I
that gives us an
suspect we're gonna-
opportunity to get this information back, because.
Mr. Kretz has amendments, and Ms.
Yeah.
Martinez had some proposals. I think all of that should come back.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Great. So, yeah, I'd like to see that, because I'm inclined to support Ms. Martinez's motion or some variation on it if we can get that information back. The other question I had, and I said I was asking questions from both sides of the discussion here, I want to make sure that whatever we do is legally defensible and enforceable. And we heard testimony from the gentleman representing the banks that the term investigations was so open-ended that it needed to be tighter to be legally enforceable. That it could be just anybody who's made a complaint then counts as a ding, as opposed to something that has some substantiation to it.
Right. I think from my standpoint, the notion of the pending investigation, there is some benefit to the city to know what's happening with any of its vendors, but I think whether or not it was used as criteria may be a different story. And so I think there is a line of demarcation there, and that also is one of the items that we were asked to refine and come back with. And so we'll take that point into consideration and work with city attorney to refine the language there so that what we have is enforceable for the city.
Right. The other piece I'd like to see some info on when you do the matrix or the report back is there was testimony that from the folks from the bank that the reporting requirements were overly burdensome. That struck me as not all that accurate. I wouldn't think that giving this information to the city of Los Angeles would be overly burdensome. I think asking the city or asking any member of the community or one of the organizations to go out and start searching federal databases and stuff is far more burdensome than asking the banks to provide it. So if you could report on whether or not other jurisdictions have had a similar provision, that would be helpful and insightful. Thank you.
and I suppose the answer to that depends on how broadly we define the term, and how much it varies from federal law or state law or otherwise. And it's a long-honored tactic that corporations sometimes engage in is burying the important stuff within mountains of unimportant stuff as well. So if we asked for every investigation of every parking ticket owned by or received by an employee of the bank, for example, you'd get boxes of reports, and within one of those boxes there would be the thing about predatory lending practices. So we don't want to get into that boat either. So anyway, this will all be kind of part of the discussion when we come back on both on the RFP, how we define those terms. Yes.
So on the investment banking side, because not only there's corporate banking, but we also issue an RFP for underwriters, we already asked them for information on investigations. So we ask them for, I think the language is something like disciplinary actions, fines, suspensions by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the financial industry regulatory agency, or any other federal and state regulatory body, and then we ask them for a description of that. So we really, we already defined that in the underwriter one. But that's, it's separate than the commercial banking side.
But the concept is, there it's limited by regulatory agency as opposed to type of investigation, which makes some sense. And maybe that applies to the commercial banking industry or not.
So that could be an idea.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, still on the same topic of how we, making sure we know the scope issue, which we're talking about. Yes, we want all the, if they're getting complaints about dirty bathrooms in their banks in North Dakota, that may not be relevant unless it's happening all across the country or something to that effect, whereas predatory lending is much more important. So there needs to be some sort of reasonableness standard or way that we can sift through this stuff so that it is meaningful and we are getting the real information. I was worried about the investment banks because most of the stuff in the banking ordinance is not, it doesn't apply to the investment banks.
There is some stuff that does. Obviously, social responsibility does. But they don't get a CRE score. A lot of these are, all they do is underwriting. So we have a form that they fill out, all the banks fill out, both on the investment banking side
Right.
and on the underwriting side. So the investment banking side would mirror what, as much as we could, the banking side. So there's a question about whistleblower. Well, that applies to underwriters as it does to bankers. So we would incorporate a question on our form that says, do you have these policies? We came up with 3 or 4 questions that, with the current, the way it currently reads, that we would ask them about whistleblowers. We'd ask them about, the type of, investigations that they do on the actual form. We would ask them about, violations that they may have, compliance with consumer financial protection laws, because there are laws that were passed both for underwriters and bankers that they have to comply with. And then we'd ask them, have you not been following them? Has there been action against you? That was our preliminary try at taking the ordinance and putting it into what you all wanted as a response. Because what we've been asking for is information. That information is posted, every July? I think we have 60 days after the first of the year, and we work very closely with Todd to make sure that we post the underwriter side and we post the banking side on our websites.
So is there going to be, do we need to have more ways to capture the investment banks into this ordinance?
I think that if we ask similar questions, we'd get there. The only thing they don't do is they don't get a CRA score. They're not.
Right. No, I recognize most of this. A lot of the threshold stuff is not thresholds.
It's not going to apply to them.
But some of the social responsibility
Yes.
stuff, and clearly we need to look at them. That's probably the prime drivers of the financial crisis, and
yes, they were.
we need to take that into consideration. And maybe that's where, on the other issue, which we've talked about, is this predatory lending issue and how we define it. And I talked about this with regard to the other item, but I do urge us on this one to also look at some of the examples that we had on the state level, and I remember spending a lot of time on this with AB 689 having to do with annuities and creating the suitability issue and 10 different factors, and that has been put in practice and has sort of passed the legal muster, so it's worth looking at, even though that was more limited for this item as well as obviously the other one we talked about. That's it.
Mr. Hunter? Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, just one point when you go back to work on this. I'm not attached to any of the specific language in my motion. In fact, I originally asked for something more specific, and there was a concern that if it was too specific, we might be more constrained and it might not apply. We've also heard the other concern, the opposite direction, if it's too general, that it might not hold up in court. So I'd ask the city attorney's office to look very carefully at both of those elements, because I've gotten several different opinions from different folks, so it's obviously somewhat on the head of a pin which way it goes. So I probably lean, in terms of what I'm actually looking for, closer to what Nuri asked for in her letter. So as strong as we can make it and as specific as we can make it without causing ourselves any legal headaches.
Anything else, members? Okay, so I'm going to ask then that the city attorney report back with options for amending the RBO in a manner, and I would like you to evaluate and report back on the recommendations, both contained in Mr. Kretz's motion and in Ms. Martinez's letter, so that we may seek to obtain disclosure from financial institutions about employee compensation practices with regard to sales goals and so forth, and whether employees may be disciplined or terminated for failing to meet sales targets, and also helping us to further define the issue of reporting of investigations and enforcement actions. Anything else, members?
Well, and does that capture getting the report back on the narrowing in on the predatory loan, the predatory practices versus the other sales practices? Because I do get concerned if it's too broad.
Yeah, and that's what I would expect the city attorney would report back to us to evaluate, you know, the definition of those terms and so forth and give us recommendations. And obviously, in consultation with CAO and finance, because we do have parallel issues both between this and the RFP and our existing practice with investment banks. So, so in consultation with the others, I'd like to get that report back. If we can, let's try to bring that back at the next meeting as well so we can consider these matters together. All right?
Thank you.
Okay. With that objection, then, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you very much. Thanks to all who came down to speak about those matters. Members, items 1 through 3, I had proposed for consent. Mr. Blumenfield has a question on number 2, but as to 1 and 3, if there is no objection, we'll go ahead and approve items 1 and 3, and public comment has been exhausted on those items. Let's bring up item number 2, please.
Item number 2 is Collections Board review report relative to delinquent account receivables submitted by the Los Angeles Fire Department, Department of City Planning, Los Angeles Housing and Community Investment Department, and Los Angeles Department of Transportation.
Good afternoon, Saul Robo with the Office of Finance. I am a representative on the Board of Review Committee, and so I am willing to see if I could answer your question.
Yeah, fairly, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
So when we have amounts due to building and safety for code violations, failure to pay the inspection fees, we have a lien process to ensure that the city collects the amounts due. Some of these debts, especially HSIDs, involve invoices are also related to REAP, but also some of the fire departments and planning invoices are tied to specific properties. So the question is, can we create a program of property tax liens to collect some of these types of debts? Should we do that? The ones, specifically the debts that are tied to properties. So I don't really have it's not so much a problem with a specific item in the forgiveness of the ones in front of us, but it's more a question of whether or not there are more debts that we could collect if we tied them.
I think that's a good question. What I could do is I could take it back to my colleagues on the board and certainly address that with the respective departments where that would be applicable, because I don't know enough about the intimacies on the respective departments where we could potentially apply that. But as a board member, I certainly would be interested in seeing why a response from the departments why that would or would not work, and see if we could come up with some good methodology or good report back to come to the board and then up to the council with the response.
Okay, because even the ones that we're looking at, a number of them are tied to properties. So it's not just other departments, but it is specifically with fire department and HSID. So, but I appreciate that, and I'm okay with that answer. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. England.
Just quickly, why were there so many accounts on HSID?
I'm sorry, Councilmember, I couldn't.
There were so many accounts, roughly $7.5 million. Why so many?
Well, I could say that the departments are doing a very aggressive approach to try and clean up some of the age receivables, and so that's one of the factors that's working here is that they're taking a lot of the old outstanding debt and seeing what is already out of statute, what elements they've already tried working through a primary and secondary collection agency.
So I know the process, but so how far back do some of these ones go with HSID?
Oh, well, some of them go back at least 5 years, some of them at least 7 years, again, because they're cleaning out the accounting system. And
I don't remember them coming through here often. We see the fire department most of the time. And
right,
that's
right.
understandable.
And these happen to be unique because in some instances it could be one individual or one account that has an aggregate value that is beyond the $5,000 threshold, and to be consistent with the spirit of the process, we want to make sure that the council is aware of that.
I guess one last question is then, should we have something that is somewhat regular, whether it's annually at a minimum for each of these departments?
Well, our office is now annually reporting on the age receivables, and we are in the process of obtaining the year-end data for the departments, and we'll be coming back to you with an annual report on their progress and the age receivables, and as well as how far they've gotten. And so we've seen that they're whittling down that figure.
And if it's done annually, it'll be much easier, and particularly for the budget. I mean, some of these dollars were already programmed and budgeted, obviously. And they've been adjusted. It's been over several years. But that's why it'll be good to know, certainly annually. If there's a way to time that to get those numbers back by department on aging receivables, particularly ones that are likely to be uncollectible prior to us getting the draft budget, I think in April would make, or at least even, I was going to say an FSR, but probably makes sense to get it before the budget. So we have an idea moving forward on some of these departments, because we budget our receivables.
I think that's a realistic expectation, and we can certainly have that information to you before that process by the departments.
Okay.
And just to follow up on that, since it seems like most of the HSID receivables were for REAP administration fee balances and delinquent penalties, why do we release them from REAP before all those fees are paid? Why don't they remain in REAP? We continue to collect what we're owed off of the rental income as well before they're released from REAP. Is that not our practice?
It isn't, but I know we have a representative here from the housing department who could probably get to more specifics on that.
Well, good. And then while we're at it, then the backup to that would be, can't we take a lien to enforce that amount, even if we can't get it from their rental income?
Good afternoon, council members. Michael Prendergast with Housing Community Investment Department Billing Collections Unit. In answer to your question, we do have a very robust effort to keep our accounts receivable up to date and clean on this. And as the councilman pointed out with the REAP final accounting, what we did here was clean up based on city attorney's opinion that the age of them. Originally, the REAP admin fee is based on how many units are in REAP at the moment in time. So if you're in there for 5 years, and then we do the reconciliation when they're ready to come out of the REAP case, when the violation has been resolved, that's where the fee comes in. So that's a $50 unit a month, and if it's not paid in 90 days, there's a 100% penalty, and then you accrue 1% interest a month on that, on top of that fee. So based on the city attorney that we were holding all the REAP admin fees, but also associated invoices to the property that was in REAP during that point in time, from the notice of acceptance into REAP until the final violations and council resolution to allow it to come out of REAP. So this is part of our cleanup and what we're looking at here today. We do come on a regular basis. Every quarter we report to the Collection Board of Review for our write-offs. Our predominant invoices are the Rent Stabilization Ordinance and the Systematic Code Enforcement Program, of which we collect about $45 million annually. We have an excellent collection rate of about 96% on regular fees when we bill that at the end of December each year. So, and we have, again, taken a look at more additional avenues. We did look at filing liens, and that was not something that was deemed appropriate because different invoice types, some could be allowed to go into liens, some would have to take a separate action, then you'd be bifurcating that process. We've got a robust online portal right now where we're taking in almost 30% of our annual revenue through that. We're launching a new program on that December the 6th, which will allow a property owner to see his entire history of what's owed on that account and allow for them, along with the management companies, in order to go ahead and make those payments. So electronic system going online, we're really increasing that and reaching out and doing community outreach to the various associations of landlords and property owners as well.
Okay, so that's with regard to the SCAP and the other RSO fees. But I'm asking specifically about REAP administration fees and penalties. The only way a landlord gets out from REAP is with a resolution that's approved by the council. So why is it the case, or can it not be the case, that that is not presented to council until such time as every penny that we're owed for those fees is current?
It's my understanding right now that the mutually exclusive on that. I would like to have a city attorney to go in more detail on that with you. But from what we've been told, that the notice on title of your property is in REAP is not an actual lien.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry, Councilmember. when a property goes into REAP, a notice is put on the property owner title notifying that the property is in REAP. It's not a lien against the property.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm asking a slightly different question. A property is in REAP.
Yes.
We start collecting, we start lockboxing the rental payments in order to ensure that the repairs are made and the property is brought back up to where it's supposed to be. The landlord doesn't get their rental income until they bring their property up to speed, right? So at some point, we release the property from REAP, allowing the landlord to receive their rental income again because we've acknowledged that they've brought the property up to an appropriate state of good repair and it's no longer in violation of the law. Why can't we just say that they won't be released from REAP until they've paid all of their fees and penalties as well?
Certainly. Two things. One, it's a voluntary contribution of the tenant into REAP. It's not mandatory, so the landlord does collect some rent. Under the REAP program, the rent payments can be reduced based on the severity of those violations. The second part of your question, if I may, was on refusing to release the property from REAP until all the fees have been paid. That was something we've been advised at the city attorney that is not, we could not do. We could on that, sir.
Okay. Well, maybe we can ask the city attorney to have a look at that and report to the committee what our options may be for that, because this is over $7 million, and it seems to me that we shouldn't be letting these folks off the hook. We don't give certificates of occupancy until a developer has complied with their obligations to the city. I don't know why we would allow a landlord to continue collecting full rent if they owe the city money. So it seems to me there's something that we could do to ensure collection there based on that. Yes, Mr. Bloomfield.
One last thing I have to ask. I see an DOT request to write off 50 citations to one driver for $9,500 to $9,000. How did that happen? And I mean, isn't there a point after 25 citations where we just impound the car?
Sometimes we have incidents where, as I understand it, where we have a lot of out-of-towners who are frequent visitors or who are frequently here in town that it makes it very difficult on them to collect, as well as sometimes some of our international travelers who are frequent visitors to LA. I could find out specific information about this specific case to see what it was. I just can't recall off the top of my head from memory what that particular incident was.
And is there any way to have some sort of reciprocity agreement with other states? I mean, this guy was from, or gal was from Arizona, where, at a certain threshold, we empower them to impound the vehicle there, or vice versa?
I'll have to punt that question to DOT.
And regardless of where the guy lives, when you're writing ticket number 49 or so, instead of writing the ticket, you get the boot, don't you? Don't you call in for the boot at that point rather than?
It is an impound. Boot's a plan.
Okay. Well, that's just what that one just jumped out at me. So, in addition to the report backs that we already talked about, if we get one on that too, both what happened with this case, but also if there's a way to create a reciprocity program. So, in addition to the report back about the potential lien program.
Okay. Anything else on this, members? Mr. Englander, you're good? Okay. Okay. Then if there's no other questions or concerns, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the item. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that concludes our agenda items.
With the two report backs.
Yes. So that brings us to general public comment. Mr. Kwan is gone, so it brings up Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman. Thank you, members.
So what did we learn today? We learned nothing today. What will we learn tomorrow? We'll learn nothing tomorrow. Nuri gave you instructions, but you listened to the campaign donors. Now, all this work to get our banking is now gone to shit. And that's the problem, is because this should have been done the first minute of the meeting, but instead, you put through and everybody starts walking out like, dibble, 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 dwarf. Dibble, 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 dwarf.
Speaking, you need to speak.
Yes, well, he's walking out. Now we got the Peppa Pig walking out. And that's what he's doing. He's walking out. Look at this. He just went and used the restroom. But he did say bye, and that was very nice. All right, so finally, let's keep splitting up these minutes, get us up to 5 minutes, and then we can decompress.
So during the Claims Board meeting for Monday at 1 p.m., for Mr. Wayne, asking for mandatory pre-settlement under LACV 17-08064/AG/E. You see, now we have a police complaint, police retaliation against a gentleman by the name of Michael Hunt, a Ninth Circuit winner. And as I said during these claims, we heard about slip and falls, we heard about bicycle accidents, and yet that dumb son of a bitch from District 11, Mr. Road Diet fuck, steps out because he knows it's coming. Settle for Woods versus Los Angeles, spent the $30 million fucking dollars to fix our fucked up infrastructure, you stupid fucking.
Is there any other business before the committee?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
We are adjourned.